What if the version of success you've been chasing is the very thing keeping you from what God actually called you to become? You've been grinding, planning, sacrificing, hustling in the name of stewardship, while secretly wondering if the kingdom is even paying attention. You hear the sermons about faithfulness, but your hands are blistered from obedience, and the reward still hasn't shown up. You're watching others rise with compromise, while your own life feels stuck in spiritual traffic, and the lie creeps in. Maybe success requires a little more self, and a little less surrender. But here's the truth. Heaven has been trying to whisper through the noise. You don't need to climb what God has called you to carry. You don't need to build what God never breathed on. What if God's version of promotion looks nothing like a paycheck? What if the applause of heaven sounds nothing like the cheers of man? And what if the pain you're avoiding is the very altar where your success is being refined? This isn't just another message about money, ambition, or dreams. This is a divine confrontation, a sacred interruption. Heaven pulling back the curtain on the lie the world has sold you and the church has tolerated. Because today, you're about to see what no one ever showed you. Success in God's kingdom isn't what you do. It's who you become in the fire that no one sees. You were not called to be impressive. You were called to be obedient. And in God's eyes, that is success. Success isn't measured, it's revealed. The world taught you to measure success by outcomes. Numbers, platforms, recognition. They gave you metrics, followers, revenue, promotions, and somewhere along the way, even the church started handing out crowns for visibility rather than for virtue. But in the kingdom, success isn't something you earn. It's something God reveals when your heart can carry it. You've been asking for increase. But increase without identity isn't a blessing. It's a setup. You think you're waiting on opportunity, but heaven is waiting on alignment. Because in the kingdom, God would rather delay your platform than promote your pride. He would rather hide you than allow the world to poison what He's still purifying. The wilderness is not punishment, it's preservation. God hides what He treasures. And right now, what feels like rejection may actually be the greatest sign of divine favor on your life. The silence, the delay, the seeming obscurity. These are not indicators of failure. They are heaven's protection over a soul not yet ready to carry the weight of glory. You weren't overlooked, you were covered. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." That means what you've been calling slow progress, God calls sacred preparation. What you've been calling lack, God calls leverage. Because in God's economy, the process is the point. And real success isn't about finishing first. It's about finishing faithful. You don't need a spotlight to be seen by heaven. You need an altar. And sometimes the greatest evidence of your calling is your current invisibility. God's idea of greatness looks like servanthood, not a status. You were taught that greatness means rising above, but Jesus knelt down. You were told success is about how many follow you, but Christ's success was proven in how many He served. The cross was not a detour from greatness, it was the throne of it. The kingdom doesn't crown the ambitious, it anoints the surrendered. You've been taught to chase dreams, but dreams without death birth idols. And before God ever lets your vision live, He'll let your pride die. Because in heaven's eyes, greatness has never been about visibility. It's about vulnerability. Are you willing to serve in silence? Are you willing to wash the feet of people who don't understand your calling? The world builds towers to touch the sky, but the kingdom builds altars to touch God. And you have a choice. You can chase the Tower of Babel, or build the altar of obedience. Mark 10:43-44. Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. This flips everything. The office God promotes you to might not come with a title. It might come with a towel. And here's the truth no one taught you. God isn't against your ambition. He just refuses to let it lead. Because when ambition drives, surrender dies. And wherever surrender dies, success becomes self-made, not spirit-led. You weren't created to strive your way into greatness. You were formed to yield your way into purpose. Because in the kingdom, the lowest place is often the closest place to the throne. Your calling is not a career. It's a cross. Somewhere along the way, you confused your career with your calling. You started thinking that your purpose would look like a polished resume, instead of a refined soul. But God never promised you a position. He promised you a process. And that process always leads to a cross. Not a stage, not a salary, a cross. Because before God ever calls you to impact the world, He calls you to die to the version of success the world gave you. You wanted clarity. He offered crucifixion. You prayed for acceleration. He gave you a tomb. Because the kingdom doesn't begin in visibility. It begins in burial. Luke 9-23. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. That verse doesn't mark it well, does it? It won't fill a stadium, but it will fill your soul. You've been asking God to open doors, but have you opened your hands? You've been begging Him for your destiny. But are you still clinging to your definition of it? The truth is, you can't carry both the world's version of success and the cross of Christ. One will kill the other, and the only way to truly live is to die. Because success in the kingdom isn't what happens when you finally get the promotion. It's what happens when you let your pride be buried in the garden of obedience. And in that soil, God doesn't just grow your calling, He resurrects your soul. The reward isn't riches, it's refinement, let's be honest. You thought obedience would lead to overflow. You gave, you served, you sacrificed. And yet, the bank account stayed empty. The doors stayed shut. The breakthrough stayed delayed. You started asking the dangerous question, if I've done everything right, why hasn't God come through? But that question reveals the lie. Because somewhere, subtly, the world trained you to see obedience as a transaction. You were sold a prosperity gospel wrapped in Christian language, but heaven never offered you profit. It offered you purification. Malachi 3:3 says, He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. Refinement isn't glamorous, it's violent. It burns what doesn't belong. It melts the mixture, it exposes the hidden sediment, and doesn't stop until all that remains is holy. And here's what no one told you. God's reward is not what He gives you, it's who He makes you. The treasure isn't the house, the deal, the followers, or the influence. It's the transformed heart that no longer needs those things to feel secure. So, maybe the reason God hasn't answered the way you expected is because He's answering in a deeper way. He's delivering you from needing the answer at all. You thought you needed success to be validated. God is showing you that validation was the idol He's removing. Because once your identity no longer depends on outcome, you become unstoppable in the Spirit. This is the reward. Not riches, not results, but refinement. A heart that no longer chases the world, because it's already consumed by God. Hiddenness is not a sign of failure, it's a strategy of heaven. You keep asking why you're still unseen, why the opportunities skip over you, why the recognition never seems to come. You watch others rise, some with less integrity, less devotion, less depth, and wonder if heaven forgot your name. But listen closely. Heaven hides what it's preparing. Obscurity isn't absence, it's a strategy. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, not because he failed, but because he was being formed. David was anointed as king but sent back to the fields. Even Jesus, the Son of God, spent 30 years in silence before he preached a single sermon. You are not behind. You are being built. Isaiah 49:2 says, "He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in his quiver." God hides his sharpest weapons, because if he released you too soon, the pressure would destroy what he's still developing. If he opened the doors before your heart was healed, the applause would become your addiction. So he hides you, not to punish you, but to protect you. The hidden season is the holy season. It's where roots grow deep. It's where identity is forged without performance. It's where faith is purified without applause. So if you feel invisible, unwanted, or overlooked, rejoice, because that means heaven sees something in you that's not ready to be shared yet. You are not being delayed. You are being trusted, and when the time is right, the same God who hid you will reveal you, not for your glory, but for his. Prosperity without purpose is a trap, not a blessing. You've been praying for the overflow, but have you asked God what it's for? Because in the kingdom, increase without assignment is a setup for destruction. The enemy doesn't fear a wealthy believer. He fears a wealthy believer who knows why they've been blessed. The devil doesn't mind you getting rich, as long as it pulls you from reliance. He doesn't mind you getting promoted, as long as it detaches you from presence. That's why some doors haven't opened. Not because God is punishing you, but because he's protecting the purity of your calling. Because the worst thing heaven could do is give you what your character can't sustain. Luke 12:15. Watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Success becomes a curse when it replaces surrender. Money becomes a weight when it isn't nailed to the altar. And influence becomes poison when it's not born out of intimacy. This is why God strips idols before he gives increase. Not to withhold joy, but to make room for it. Because if your joy is tied to your bank account, it will rise and fall like the stock market. But if your joy is tied to obedience, it becomes unshakable. You thought financial blessing was the ultimate sign of favor, but in the kingdom, favor looks more like authority over your own soul. Peace that doesn't depend on a paycheck. Boldness that isn't bought. Conviction that cannot be sold. God does not want you broke, but he does want you free. And he will withhold what binds you until he's sure you can carry it without chains. Because in the end, success without submission is still failure, just dressed better. Heaven doesn't applaud results. It crowns faithfulness. You've been conditioned to chase outcomes. You've tied your worth to results. You've believed the lie that if it's not big, fast, and visible, it's not valuable. But that's not how heaven measures success. In the kingdom, the reward doesn't go to the most visible. It goes to the most faithful. Matthew 25:23. Well done, good and faithful servant. Not rich servant, not famous servant, not busy, efficient, impressive, or followed servant, just faithful. That's what God is after. Were you faithful with what no one saw? Did you still show up when no one clapped? Did you sow seeds in secret, love people who never said thank you, obey the whisper when it cost you everything? You thought the goal was to build something big, but God's goal was to build you. He doesn't need your success, he wants your surrender. Because a surrendered heart is more powerful than a successful platform. You can have influence without intimacy and still miss heaven's reward. You can build a name, a brand, a ministry, and still never hear, "Well done." Because fruit without faithfulness rots. That's the line the Spirit is drawing today. He's not asking, "How much did you grow?" He's asking, "Did you obey when it cost you?" He's asking, "Did you remain when it felt pointless?" He's asking, "Did you build what I told you, or what they applauded?" Because the day will come when every earthly crown falls, and the only thing left standing will be the echo of your obedience. You don't need to be successful. You need to be sent. This is where the lie gets exposed. You've been chasing success, but success was never supposed to lead you. You were meant to be sent, not self-appointed, and the difference is everything. When you chase success, you build what looks good. When you're sent by God, you build what carries weight in the Spirit. Being sent means you didn't choose this. You didn't craft the brand. You didn't strategize your way into purpose. You obeyed. You waited. You surrendered. And one day, heaven said, "Now, go." Romans 10:15. How can anyone preach unless they are sent? That verse isn't about preaching sermons. It's about living lives that carry divine assignment. Because the devil doesn't fear gifted people. He fears sent ones. You can gain success through hustle, but only the sent carry authority. Only the sent can walk into chaos and shift atmospheres. Only the sent can speak with fire because they've burned on the altar of silence. This is why some doors have remained closed. Not because you're not qualified, but because God doesn't send until the vessel is empty of self. Heaven is not hiring performers. It's commissioning the broken, the yielded, the invisible, the faithful. So maybe you've been asking the wrong question. It's not, how do I succeed? It's, am I willing to be sent, even if it doesn't look like success? Because when you're sent by God, you don't need the world's validation. You walk in power. You speak with fire. You live with peace. And that is the only kind of success hell can't counterfeit. You've been exhausted. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trying to carry a version of success God never asked you to build. You thought success was the proof of your faith. But in the kingdom, success is not proof. It's fruit. And fruit only grows from surrender. So hear this now. You were never behind. You were never disqualified. You were simply being stripped of what couldn't go with you. The silence wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The obscurity wasn't rejection. It was refinement. The delay wasn't denial. It was mercy. And the success God has for you, it's not shallow. It's not for show. It's the kind that crushes demons when you pray in secret. It's the kind that shifts generations because you stayed faithful in hidden places. This is heaven's definition of success. Obedience when it hurts. Holiness when it's costly. Love when it's not returned. Peace that survives the fire. So if this wrecked you, if it shattered your old idea of success and whispered God's truth back into your soul, comment below, God, redefine my success. And if you want to keep hearing what heaven is whispering, subscribe. Not to follow a channel, but to follow the sound of truth in a world full of noise. You were never called to impress. You were called to be faithful. And in God's eyes, that's success.